In the unforgiving skies above hostile territory, where split-second decisions mean the difference between life and death, call signs aren't just names. They're prophecies written in blood and courage. Captain Marcus Bulldog Richardson thought he knew everything about aerial combat until the day a soft-spoken female pilot with an unusual call sign shattered every assumption he'd ever held about what it means to be a warrior. What started as a routine joke in the squadron briefing room would become a legend whispered in military corridors for decades to come. Because sometimes the most unlikely heroes emerge from the shadows when the world needs them most. And sometimes an angel's wings are forged from the strongest iron. This is the story of how Iron Angel earned her name, and how one man's skepticism turned to awe in the face of extraordinary courage that defied every rule he thought he understood about war, honor, and the human spirit. The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac at Marine Corps Air Station Yuma as Captain Marcus Richardson adjusted his flight suit and checked his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. The pre-dawn briefing had been standard protocol, but something about today felt different. Maybe it was the crisp desert air that seemed to carry an electric charge, or perhaps it was the unusual addition to their squadron that had everyone talking in hushed tones. Captain Sarah Chun had arrived at the base 3 weeks ago, transferring in from a classified assignment that nobody seemed willing to discuss. Her personnel file was surprisingly thin for someone with her rank, containing only the basics: exceptional flight scores, multiple commendations, and a call sign that had raised more than a few eyebrows among the veteran pilots. Iron Angel, Richardson muttered under his breath as he walked toward the hangar where the morning briefing was scheduled. The name seemed like a contradiction in terms. In his 15 years of military service, he'd never encountered a call sign that combined such opposing elements. Call signs were usually earned through memorable mistakes, embarrassing moments, or distinctive personality traits. They were meant to be badges of brotherhood, inside jokes that bound squadrons together through shared experiences and mutual respect. The hangar buzzed with conversation as pilots gathered around the large tactical display screen. Richardson took his usual spot near the back, where he could observe both the briefing and the reactions of his fellow aviators. The squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel James Hammer Morrison, stood at attention beside the display, his weathered face betraying nothing of the morning's agenda. "Gentlemen," Morrison began, then caught himself with a slight smile, "and, lady, we have a new addition to our training exercises today. Captain Chun will be joining Red Flight for today's air-to-air combat simulation." Richardson glanced around the room and spotted Chun sitting quietly in the front row. She was smaller than most of the pilots, with dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, and an expression that seemed to absorb everything while revealing nothing. Her flight suit bore the same patches as everyone else, but somehow she managed to look both completely at home and utterly mysterious. "Sir," called out Captain Tony Maverick Stevens from across the room, "what's the story behind the call sign?" Iron Angel sounds more like a heavy metal band than a Marine aviator. The question hung in the air like smoke from a crash landing. Richardson found himself leaning forward, genuinely curious about the answer. Call sign stories were sacred tradition in military aviation, part of the oral history that bound generations of pilots together. Some were funny, others were embarrassing, but all of them revealed something essential about the person who carried the name. Chun turned in her seat to face the room, her dark eyes scanning the assembled pilots with calm confidence. "The name comes from a mission I flew over Somalia 3 years ago," she said, her voice carrying clearly despite its quiet tone. "Our unit was providing close air support for a humanitarian convoy that came under heavy fire from local militias." Richardson noticed that several pilots had stopped their side conversations to listen. There was something in Chen's voice that commanded attention without demanding it, a quality that spoke of experience earned through fire rather than classroom instruction. The convoy included medical supplies and personnel heading to a refugee camp about 40 miles inland, Chen continued. Intelligence reports indicated minimal resistance, but the situation deteriorated rapidly once the trucks reached the designated area. The militias had positioned heavy weapons in concealed locations throughout the valley, and our ground forces found themselves pinned down with limited options for extraction. Morrison nodded approvingly as Chin spoke. Richardson realized that the squadron commander already knew this story, which meant he had specifically requested Chin's transfer to their unit. That raised interesting questions about what kind of missions they might be preparing for. My wingmen and our flying F/A-18 Hornets, loaded primarily for ground attack rather than air-to-air combat, Chin explained. The original mission plan called for us to provide deterrent presence while the convoy completed its delivery and returned to base. When the shooting started, everything changed. Stevens leaned back in his chair, his earlier joking demeanor replaced by professional interest. Richardson found himself studying Chin's facial expressions, looking for tells that might reveal more about her personality and capabilities. Her hands remained folded calmly in her lap, and her breathing appeared steady despite recounting what was obviously a high-stress situation. The militia forces had prepared carefully for this ambush, Chun said. They knew our standard operating procedures and had positioned their weapons to create overlapping fields of fire that would make traditional close air support extremely dangerous. Any approach vector that allowed us to engage their positions would also expose our aircraft to concentrated anti-aircraft fire from multiple directions. Richardson felt a familiar tightness in his chest as Chun described the tactical situation. He had been in similar circumstances during his deployment to Afghanistan, where seemingly routine missions could transform into life-or-death struggles in a matter of seconds. The difference between survival and disaster often came down to split-second decisions made under extreme pressure. The convoy commander radioed that they had wounded personnel who needed immediate medical evacuation, but the landing zone was completely dominated by enemy fire, Chun continued. Standard procedure would have been to call for reinforcements and attempt to establish a secure perimeter before attempting any rescue operations. However, the medical personnel on the ground indicated that several of the wounded wouldn't survive the time it would take for additional forces to arrive. Morrison stepped forward slightly, his expression indicating that this was the crucial part of the story. Richardson glanced around the room and noticed that every pilot was now paying complete attention. The morning briefing had transformed into something more significant than routine squadron business. My wingmen and I developed a plan that went against conventional tactical doctrine, Chun said. Instead of approaching the target area in a coordinated formation designed to maximize our firepower while minimizing exposure, we decided to execute a series of individual attacks from opposite directions. The goal was to create enough confusion among the enemy forces to allow the convoy to reach a defensible position. The tactical implications of Chin's decision began to register with Richardson. Flying individual attack runs against prepared positions was essentially a suicide mission, especially when the enemy had time to coordinate their anti-aircraft defenses. The survival rate for such operations was historically poor, even under the best circumstances. The first pass was designed to draw enemy fire and identify their primary weapon positions, Chin explained. I approached from the northwest at extremely low altitude, using the terrain to mask my approach until the last possible moment. The idea was to appear suddenly, above the enemy positions, deliver a quick strike, and escape before they could coordinate their response. Richardson found himself mentally flying the mission alongside Chun, imagining the stress and split-second calculations required to execute such a dangerous maneuver. The margin for error in low-altitude attack runs was virtually non-existent, particularly when flying over unfamiliar terrain against unknown opposition. The enemy response was immediate and intense, Chin continued. They had positioned multiple 23mm anti-aircraft guns in concealed positions throughout the valley, along with several shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles. As soon as I appeared above the ridgeline, the entire valley erupted with incoming fire. Stevens whistled low under his breath, drawing disapproving looks from several nearby pilots. Richardson shared the sentiment, but kept his reaction internal. The amount of anti-aircraft fire Chun was describing represented a significant threat even to modern military aircraft, especially when approaching at low altitude where evasive maneuvering options were limited. I managed to destroy 2 of the gun positions during the first pass, but took significant damage to my aircraft in the process, Chun said. Multiple systems warnings indicated hits to the hydraulic system, electrical components, and primary flight controls. Under normal circumstances, the prudent decision would have been to return to base immediately for emergency landing procedures. Morrison's slight nod indicated approval of Chen's tactical assessment. Richardson realized that Chun was describing a decision point that every combat pilot hoped never to face, choosing between personal safety and mission accomplishment when the 2 objectives became mutually exclusive. However, the ground forces radioed that my attack had provided enough suppression to allow them to reach better defensive positions, but they still needed additional support to complete the medical evacuation, Chun continued. My wingman was positioning for his attack run, but the enemy forces were already adjusting their tactics in response to our initial assault. The complexity of the tactical situation was becoming clear to Richardson. Chun and her wingmen were facing an enemy that had demonstrated both preparation and adaptability, while operating aircraft that had already sustained significant damage. The odds of successfully completing their mission while surviving the encounter were diminishing with each passing moment. I made the decision to continue the attack despite the damage to my aircraft, Chun said simply. The wounded personnel on the ground deserved every possible effort to ensure their survival, and my aircraft was still capable of delivering ordnance even with compromised systems. The understated way Chun described her decision impressed Richardson more than dramatic heroic language would have. There was something profoundly authentic about her matter-of-fact approach to describing what was obviously an extraordinary act of courage under fire. The second attack run required a completely different approach, Chun explained. The enemy forces now knew our general tactics and had repositioned their weapons to counter our initial strategy. Instead of approaching from a predictable vector, I decided to use the terrain more creatively. Morrison stepped closer to the tactical display and activated a topographical map of what Richardson assumed was the Somali Valley where Chen's mission had taken place. The terrain featured steep ridgelines, narrow valleys, and scattered vegetation that could provide both concealment and navigation challenges for low-flying aircraft. I approached the target area from the southeast, using a dry riverbed to mask my approach until I was almost directly over the enemy positions, Chun continued. This required flying at an altitude of less than 50 feet for nearly 5 miles, with damaged flight controls and limited visibility due to dust and smoke from the initial attacks. The technical challenge of Chen's approach began to register fully with Richardson. Flying at such low altitude required constant attention to terrain features, wind conditions, and aircraft performance characteristics. Adding damaged flight controls and poor visibility to the equation created a scenario that would challenge even the most experienced pilots. As I cleared the final ridgeline before the target area, I discovered that the enemy had anticipated this approach vector and positioned additional weapons along the riverbed, Chun said. I found myself flying directly into a coordinated ambush with no time to abort the attack run. Stevens shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and Richardson noticed that several other pilots were exhibiting similar reactions. The tactical situation Chun was describing represented every combat pilot's worst nightmare. Flying into prepared enemy positions with compromised aircraft and no viable escape route. At that point, conventional wisdom suggested that survival required immediate evasive action, even if it meant abandoning the attack, Chun continued. However, the ground forces were reporting that the medical evacuation was in progress, and they needed just a few more minutes of suppression fire to complete the operation. The weight of Chen's decision hung in the air like morning mist over the desert. Richardson found himself holding his breath, even though he knew the story had a successful conclusion based on Chen's presence in the briefing room. The psychological impact of hearing about such extreme circumstances created an almost physical tension among the assembled pilots. I decided to press the attack despite the tactical disadvantages, Chen said. The aircraft was still responding to control inputs, and I had sufficient ordnance remaining to effectively engage the enemy positions. The key was to maximize the impact of the attack while minimizing exposure time over the target area. Morrison activated another display showing typical attack profiles for ground assault missions. Richardson studied the diagrams while listening to Chen's explanation, trying to understand how she had managed to overcome such overwhelming tactical disadvantages. I configured the aircraft for maximum ordnance delivery in a single pass, Chen explained. This meant accepting increased vulnerability during the attack run in exchange for maximum destructive effect against enemy positions. The goal was to eliminate enough of their weapons to allow the convoy to complete its mission and withdraw safely. The trade-off Chun was describing represented one of the fundamental challenges of military aviation, balancing mission effectiveness against survival probability. In most cases, pilots were trained to prioritize survival when the two objectives became incompatible, but Chun had made the opposite choice. The attack run lasted approximately 45 seconds from target acquisition to egress, Chun continued. During that time, I engaged 12 separate enemy positions while taking continuous anti-aircraft fire from multiple directions. The aircraft sustained additional damage to the engine, landing gear, and navigation systems. Richardson tried to imagine the sensory overload of Chen's attack run. The constant noise of incoming fire, multiple warning lights, and alarms, the physical stress of high-G maneuvering with damage controls, and the mental pressure of making life-or-death decisions in real time. The fact that she had maintained mission focus under such conditions spoke to training and character that went far beyond normal expectations. When I cleared the target area, the ground forces reported that enemy resistance had been effectively suppressed and the medical evacuation was proceeding successfully, Chen said. My wingman provided cover during the extraction phase while I attempted to nurse my damaged aircraft back to base. The successful completion of the mission was obviously just the beginning of Chen's challenges that day. Richardson knew from personal experience that flying a severely damaged aircraft was often more dangerous than the original combat engagement, particularly when multiple systems had been compromised. The flight back to base required approximately 30 minutes, during which time several additional systems failed, Chen continued. The hydraulic system finally gave out completely about 10 miles from the airfield, leaving me with only manual flight controls. The engine was running rough and producing significantly reduced power, which made maintaining altitude increasingly difficult. Morrison looked around the room, making eye contact with several of the more experienced pilots. Richardson understood that the squadron commander was emphasizing the technical aspects of Chen's achievement for the benefit of those who might not fully appreciate the complexity of flying a damaged aircraft over such distance. Emergency landing procedures for aircraft with multiple system failures require careful coordination between the pilot and ground control, Chen explained. However, the base was experiencing communications difficulties due to a sandstorm that had moved through the area earlier that morning. I found myself attempting an emergency landing with minimal radio contact and reduced visibility. The accumulation of challenges in Chen's story was beginning to seem almost fictional to Richardson. The combination of combat damage, system failures, weather conditions, and communications problems represented a perfect storm of aviation difficulties that would challenge even the most skilled pilots. I configured the aircraft for emergency landing approach, knowing that the damaged landing gear might not deploy properly, Chen said. The decision point was whether to attempt a conventional landing with potentially failed gear or to execute a controlled crash landing on the aircraft's belly. The choice Chun was describing represented another life-or-death decision made under extreme stress. Either option carried significant risk, but the consequences of making the wrong choice could be catastrophic. Richardson found himself leaning forward, genuinely curious about how Chun had resolved this final challenge. I decided to attempt gear deployment despite the damage indicators, Chun continued. The main landing gear extended successfully, but the nose gear remained stuck in a retracted position. This meant landing the aircraft in a nose-high attitude and maintaining control until the nose gear could be manually lowered after touchdown. Stevens shook his head slightly, his expression reflecting amazement at Chen's series of successful decisions under pressure. Richardson shared the sentiment, recognizing that Chen's story represented the kind of extraordinary performance that became legend among military aviators. The landing was successful, though not particularly graceful, Chun concluded with a slight smile. The aircraft was eventually repaired and returned to service, and the medical evacuation mission was completed without loss of life among the convoy personnel. Morrison stepped forward as Chun finished her account. The mission Captain Chun has described resulted in saving the lives of 43 humanitarian workers and medical personnel, he said. Her actions under extreme circumstances demonstrated the kind of courage and skill that exemplifies the finest traditions of Marine Corps aviation. Richardson found himself studying Chun with new respect as the implications of her story sank in. The call sign Iron Angel suddenly made perfect sense. Iron representing the strength and determination required to press home attacks against overwhelming odds, and Angel representing the protective role she had played in saving lives at significant personal risk. The name Iron Angel was suggested by the convoy commander, whose personnel Captain Chen helped evacuate. Morrison continued. He said that watching her aircraft appear through the smoke and chaos of that valley was like seeing an avenging angel with wings of iron, determined to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The room fell silent as the pilots absorbed the full meaning of Chen's call sign. Richardson realized that his initial skepticism about the name had been completely misplaced. Iron Angel wasn't a contradiction in terms. It was a perfect description of someone who combined uncompromising strength with selfless dedication to protecting others. Chun stood up and faced the room again, her expression calm but alert. I appreciate the opportunity to share that story with you, she said. I'm looking forward to flying with this squadron and learning from all of your experiences as well. As the pilots began to disperse for their pre-flight preparations, Richardson found himself approaching Chun with genuine curiosity about her background and future plans. The morning's briefing had transformed from routine squadron business into something far more significant, and he suspected that Chen's presence would have lasting impact on their unit's capabilities and culture. 3 hours later, Richardson found himself strapped into the cockpit of his F/18 Super Hornet, running through pre-flight checks while the desert sun climbed higher in the crystal-clear Arizona sky. The morning's briefing had left him with more questions than answers about Captain Chun, but the upcoming training exercise would provide an opportunity to observe her flying skills firsthand. The training scenario was designed to simulate a complex air-to-air engagement involving multiple aircraft and shifting tactical situations. Richardson would be leading Blue Flight, consisting of himself and 2 other experienced pilots, while Chen would fly as part of Red Flight alongside Captain Stevens and Lieutenant Jake Rookie Martinez, a recent flight school graduate who was still learning the nuances of squadron operations. As Richardson completed his systems checks, he monitored the radio chatter between ground control and the other aircraft preparing for launch. Chen's voice came through clearly and professionally as she coordinated with her flight members, demonstrating the kind of calm efficiency that marked experienced combat pilots. However, Richardson noticed subtle differences in her communication style that suggested training or experience beyond standard Marine Corps protocols. Blue Lead, this is Tower. You're cleared for takeoff. Red Flight will launch in sequence behind you, came the controller's voice through Richardson's headset. Richardson acknowledged the clearance and advanced his throttles, feeling the familiar surge of power as his aircraft accelerated down the runway. The transition from ground operations to flight never lost its appeal, no matter how many times he experienced it. Today, however, he found himself particularly focused on the upcoming exercise and the opportunity to evaluate Chen's capabilities in a controlled environment. As Blue Flight formed up at 15,000 feet, Richardson glanced toward the airfield where Red Flight was completing their takeoff sequence. Chen's aircraft appeared precisely positioned relative to her wingmen, maintaining the kind of formation discipline that spoke to thousands of hours of experience. Her movements were smooth and economical, without the subtle overcorrections that often marked less experienced pilots. Blue lead, red lead. We're airborne and proceeding to the assigned training area. Chen's voice came through the radio with the same professional calm she had demonstrated during the briefing. Richardson acknowledged the transmission while studying the tactical display in his cockpit. The exercise parameters called for an initial engagement at medium range, followed by close-in maneuvering that would test both individual flying skills and team coordination. The training area covered approximately 200 square miles of desert terrain, providing ample space for realistic combat maneuvering. Blue Flight, this is control. Initial bogies are bearing 090 at 30 miles, altitude 22,000 feet. You're cleared to engage when ready, announced the exercise controller from his position in the base command center. Richardson smiled grimly as he processed the tactical information. The scenario was designed to simulate an engagement against numerically superior forces, requiring Blue Flight to use superior tactics and positioning to overcome the disadvantage. However, the addition of Chen to Red Flight had introduced an unknown variable that could significantly affect the outcome. Blue 2 and Blue 3, let's take them high and fast. Standard wall formation, weapons tight until we have positive identification, Richardson transmitted to his wingmen. The three aircraft adjusted their positions and climbed toward the initial engagement altitude. Richardson used the time to study the radar signatures of the approaching Red Flight, looking for tactical insights that might provide an advantage during the upcoming engagement. Chen's aircraft maintained perfect positioning relative to her wingmen, neither too aggressive nor too conservative in her approach. Contact. Blue lead has radar contact on 3 bogies bearing 085 at 28 miles. Called out Lieutenant Sarah Viper Thompson from Blue 2 position. Richardson confirmed the contact on his own radar while calculating intercept courses and engagement options. The relative positions of the two flights suggested that the initial engagement would occur at medium range, where radar-guided missiles would be the primary weapons. However, the scenario parameters indicated that the exercise would likely transition to close-in maneuvering once the initial exchange was completed. Blue Flight, Blue lead. Let's split the formation and approach from multiple vectors. Blue 2, take the northern approach. Blue 3, swing south and come in from their 6 o'clock position, Richardson commanded. As the 3 aircraft separated to execute their assigned approaches, Richardson monitored Red Flight's response to the developing tactical situation. Chen appeared to be coordinating her flight's defensive positioning, adjusting their formation to counter Blue Flight's multi-axis approach. Her tactical awareness seemed exceptional, anticipating Richardson's strategy and responding appropriately. Red lead, Blue lead. First merge in 30 seconds. Let's keep this clean and professional, Richardson transmitted, following standard protocols for training engagements. Copy that, Blue lead. Red Flight is ready. Chen responded, her voice betraying no hint of nervousness or excitement despite the approaching engagement. Richardson armed his simulated weapon systems and focused on his heads-up display as the two flights converged at a combined closure rate of over 1,000 miles per hour. The initial exchange would be over in seconds, but the maneuvering phase that followed could last for 30 minutes or more, depending on the skill levels of the participating pilots. Rifle, 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 called out Thompson as she simulated launching a radar-guided missile at Stevens' aircraft. The engagement erupted into a complex, three-dimensional chess match as aircraft separated, turned, and maneuvered for tactical advantage. Richardson found himself immediately impressed by Chen's performance as she smoothly evaded Thompson's simulated attack while positioning her own aircraft for a counter-engagement. Her maneuvering was both aggressive and precise, demonstrating the kind of spatial awareness that separated exceptional pilots from merely competent ones. Blue lead, Red 2 has you locked up. Martinez announced with obvious excitement as he achieved a brief targeting solution on Richardson's aircraft. Richardson smiled as he executed a series of high G turns to break Martinez's lock while simultaneously maneuvering to support Thompson's attack on Stevens. The young lieutenant was enthusiastic but still learning the finer points of air-to-air combat, making him predictable in ways that experienced pilots could exploit. However, Chin's presence as flight leader was clearly elevating Red Flight's overall performance. Blue 3, watch your 6. Red lead is maneuvering for a shot. Thompson warned as Chun positioned her aircraft behind Captain Mike Torch Williams in Blue 3 position. Richardson glanced at his tactical display and felt a surge of professional admiration as he observed Chin's maneuvering. She had somehow managed to reverse the tactical situation, transforming from defender to aggressor while her wingmen kept Blue Flight's other aircraft occupied. Her positioning was textbook perfect, demonstrating both tactical awareness and exceptional flying skills. Confirmed kill on Blue 3. Announced the exercise controller as Chun achieved a valid weapon solution on Williams' aircraft. The simulated destruction of Williams' aircraft shifted the tactical balance significantly, giving Red Flight numerical parity despite their initial disadvantage. Richardson found himself facing a much more challenging situation than he had anticipated, largely due to Chin's exceptional performance as Red Flight leader. Blue Flight, let's regroup and reassess, Richardson transmitted, using standard tactical language to coordinate with his remaining wingmen while avoiding giving away his strategy to Red Flight. As the two sides separated to reset for the next phase of the engagement, Richardson took the opportunity to study Chin's aircraft positioning and flight path. Her maneuvering exhibited a level of precision and tactical awareness that suggested extensive combat experience beyond what was typical for Marine Corps pilots. Her decisions were consistently optimal, exploiting every tactical opportunity while minimizing her own exposure to counterattack. Blue lead, Red lead. Ready to continue the engagement, Chun transmitted after allowing sufficient time for both flights to reposition. Richardson acknowledged while finalizing his strategy for the next phase. With only 2 aircraft remaining in Blue Flight, he would need to rely on superior individual performance to overcome Red Flight's numerical advantage. However, Chin's demonstration of exceptional skills suggested that achieving superiority would be more difficult than anticipated. Resume engagement. Announced the exercise controller. The second phase of the battle proved even more challenging for Richardson as Chun demonstrated an uncanny ability to anticipate his tactical moves. She seemed to understand not just the mechanics of air-to-air combat, but the psychological aspects as well, consistently positioning her aircraft where Richardson least expected to find her. Her flying was smooth and confident, with none of the hesitation that often marked pilots operating in unfamiliar environments. Blue 2, break right. Red 1 is tracking you. Richardson called out as Chun maneuvered for another attack on Thompson. Thompson responded immediately, executing a series of defensive maneuvers that would have defeated most attacking aircraft. However, Chun adjusted her own positioning with fluid precision, maintaining her targeting advantage while avoiding the defensive traps that Thompson was attempting to set. Her spatial awareness seemed almost supernatural in its accuracy. Red lead, Blue lead. Damn good flying. Richardson transmitted as Chun achieved another simulated kill, this time eliminating Thompson from the engagement. The admission cost Richardson his professional pride, but military aviation culture demanded acknowledgement of exceptional performance regardless of personal feelings. Chun had systematically dismantled Blue Flight through superior tactical awareness and flying skills that exceeded anything Richardson had encountered in recent years. Thank you, Blue Lead. Your flight provided excellent training opposition. Chun responded graciously, demonstrating the kind of professional courtesy that marked truly confident pilots. As the aircraft returned to base formation for the flight back to Yuma, Richardson found himself mentally reviewing the engagement and trying to understand how Chun had achieved such dominant performance. Her tactical decisions had been consistently optimal, but, more importantly, her execution had been flawless under the stress of simulated combat conditions. All aircraft, this is control. Return to base for debrief. Excellent flying by all participants, announced the exercise controller. The landing sequence proceeded without incident, but Richardson's mind was already focused on the upcoming debrief session where pilots would analyze their performance and discuss lessons learned. The formal review process was an essential part of military training, allowing participants to understand their mistakes and develop improved tactics for future engagements. 1 hour later, the pilots gathered in the squadron briefing room to review video footage and radar data from the training exercise. The large screen displayed a three-dimensional representation of the engagement, showing aircraft positions and movement patterns throughout the 30-minute battle. Richardson studied the data with professional interest, looking for insights that might explain Chen's exceptional performance. Let's start with the initial engagement phase, announced Major Patricia Ghost Davis, the squadron's training officer. Red Flight managed to achieve first kill despite being outnumbered and approaching from a disadvantageous position. Captain Chun, can you walk us through your tactical reasoning? Chun stood and approached the tactical display, using a laser pointer to highlight specific aircraft positions and movement patterns. The key was recognizing that Blue Flight's multi-axis approach, while tactically sound, created separation between their aircraft that could be exploited, she explained. Richardson leaned forward, genuinely interested in Chen's analysis. He had used similar tactics numerous times in the past with considerable success, but Chen had somehow identified and exploited weaknesses that he hadn't recognized. By focusing our initial response on Blue 3's southern approach, we were able to eliminate one aircraft while the other two were too far away to provide immediate support, Chen continued. The timing was critical. We had perhaps 15 seconds to achieve the kill before Blue Flight could regroup and coordinate their response. The tactical logic was sound, but Richardson realized that executing such precise timing required exceptional situational awareness and flying skills. Chun had identified a narrow window of opportunity and exploited it perfectly, demonstrating the kind of combat instincts that were typically developed through extensive experience under fire. The second phase presented different challenges, Chun continued. With Blue Flight reduced to 2 aircraft, they had greater flexibility in their maneuvering, but also increased vulnerability if we could maintain positional advantage. The key was preventing them from using their superior individual experience to offset our numerical superiority. Davis nodded approvingly as Chun explained her tactical reasoning. Richardson noticed that the other pilots were paying close attention to Chen's analysis, recognizing valuable insights that could improve their own performance in future engagements. Captain Richardson, what was your assessment of Red Flight's performance? Davis asked. Richardson stood up, choosing his words carefully. Red Flight demonstrated exceptional tactical coordination and individual flying skills, he said. Captain Chen's leadership was outstanding, and her ability to maintain situational awareness throughout a complex engagement was impressive. The formal language couldn't completely hide Richardson's genuine admiration for Chen's performance. In 15 years of military flying, he had rarely encountered a pilot who combined such exceptional skills with the tactical awareness needed to lead effectively under pressure. Lieutenant Martinez, what did you learn from today's exercise? Davis continued. Martinez stood up with obvious enthusiasm. Flying with Captain Chun was incredible, he said. Her tactical instructions were clear and timely, and she created opportunities for me to contribute effectively despite my limited experience. I learned more about air-to-air tactics in 30 minutes than I had in the previous 3 months. Chun smiled slightly at Martinez's compliment, but Richardson noticed that she seemed more focused on the tactical lessons than the personal praise. Her professional demeanor suggested someone who was accustomed to exceptional performance and viewed it as normal rather than remarkable. Captain Stevens, your thoughts on the engagement? Davis asked. Stevens looked thoughtful as he considered his response. Chin's flying reminded me of some of the Navy pilots I worked with during my exchange tour, he said. There was a precision and confidence in her maneuvering that suggested extensive combat experience. Her tactical awareness was exceptional throughout the engagement. Richardson found Stevens' observation particularly interesting. The Navy's Top Gun program was legendary for producing pilots with exceptional air-to-air combat skills, and Stevens' comparison suggested that Chin's training might have included exposure to advanced tactical programs beyond standard Marine Corps instruction. Any questions about today's exercise? Davis asked the assembled pilots. Richardson raised his hand, his curiosity finally overcoming his professional caution. Captain Chun, your flying today exhibited a level of precision and tactical awareness that goes beyond typical squadron training. What additional programs or experience contributed to your development? Chin paused for a moment, her expression becoming more guarded. I've been fortunate to participate in several advanced training programs during my career, she said carefully. Cross-training with other services and international partners has provided opportunities to learn different tactical approaches and refine my skills. The answer was technically responsive, but obviously incomplete. Richardson suspected that Chin's advanced training programs included classified assignments that she couldn't discuss in detail. Her personnel file had been unusually thin, and her tactical performance suggested experience that went far beyond standard military aviation training. The important thing is that we all learned valuable lessons today, Chin continued. Squadron training is most effective when pilots can share their experiences and learn from each other. I'm looking forward to future exercises where I can continue learning from all of you. Davis concluded the debrief session with standard administrative announcements, but Richardson noticed that several pilots lingered to continue discussing the day's lessons. Chin's exceptional performance had clearly made an impression on the squadron, raising both admiration and curiosity about her background and capabilities. As the pilots dispersed to complete their post-flight duties, Richardson found himself walking alongside Chun toward the parking area. The afternoon sun was beginning to sink toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the desert landscape that surrounded the airbase. Excellent flying today, Richardson said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Thank you, Chun replied simply. Your tactics were sound, and your execution was precise. I learned several things from observing your approach that will be useful in future exercises. Richardson appreciated the professional courtesy, but he was more interested in understanding Chin's background and future plans. How long do you expect to be assigned to this squadron? He asked. Chin glanced toward the horizon where the sun was painting the desert sky in shades of orange and red. That depends on several factors that are still being determined, she said. For now, I'm focused on integrating with the squadron and contributing to our overall capabilities. The ambiguous response confirmed Richardson's suspicion that Chin's assignment involved classified elements that she couldn't discuss openly. However, her professional demeanor and obvious skills suggested that her presence would benefit the squadron regardless of how long she remained with them. If you need any assistance getting familiar with local procedures or training areas, please let me know, Richardson offered. Chin smiled genuinely for the first time that day. I appreciate that. This seems like an outstanding squadron with exceptional pilots. I'm looking forward to learning from everyone and contributing where I can. As they reached the parking area and separated toward their respective vehicles, Richardson found himself reflecting on the day's events and their implications. Chin's arrival had already begun to change the squadron's dynamics, introducing new standards of excellence that would challenge everyone to improve their performance. The setting sun painted the mountains in brilliant colors as Richardson drove toward his quarters, but his mind remained focused on tactical questions and professional possibilities. Tomorrow would bring new training exercises and fresh opportunities to observe Chin's capabilities, but today had already provided enough evidence to convince him that Iron Angel was more than just an unusual call sign. The alarm sounded at 0347 hours, cutting through the desert night like a blade through silk. Richardson jolted awake in his quarters, instantly alert as years of military training kicked in. The emergency tone pattern indicated a real-world mission rather than another training exercise, and the timing suggested something serious was developing in their area of responsibility. By the time Richardson reached the Squadron Operations Center 8 minutes later, the building was already buzzing with activity. Charts covered the briefing room walls, communications personnel manned multiple radio stations, and the large tactical display showed a map of the Mexican border region with several red symbols indicating areas of interest. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison stood at the center of the chaos, coordinating with various staff officers while maintaining radio contact with higher headquarters. His expression was grim, but focused, the look of a commander who had received orders for a mission that would test his squadron's capabilities under actual operational conditions. "Gentlemen and lady," Morrison announced as the pilots gathered around the tactical display, "we have a real-world mission. 3 hours ago, a drug cartel kidnapped a group of American medical volunteers who were providing humanitarian aid in a remote village approximately 60 miles south of the border." Richardson felt the familiar tightness in his stomach that always preceded dangerous missions. The transition from training exercises to actual combat operations involves psychological adjustments that experienced pilots learned to manage, but never completely overcame. Today's mission would involve lives that couldn't be restored if mistakes were made. Intelligence reports indicate that the cartel moved the hostages to a compound in mountainous terrain that makes traditional ground assault extremely difficult. Morrison continued, "Mexican authorities have requested our assistance in conducting a rescue operation before the hostages are moved to a more secure location." Chun stood quietly near the front of the group, her expression calm, but alert as she absorbed the tactical information. Richardson noticed that her demeanor hadn't changed significantly from the previous day's training exercise, suggesting either exceptional emotional control or extensive experience with real-world operations. "The compound is located in a narrow valley surrounded by steep mountains," Morrison explained, using a laser pointer to highlight the target area on the tactical display. "Intelligence suggests that the cartel has positioned heavy weapons around the perimeter, including several .50 caliber machine guns and possibly shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles." The tactical situation Morrison was describing presented significant challenges for military aircraft. The mountainous terrain would limit approach vectors while the defensive weapons posed serious threats to low-flying aircraft. Success would require precise coordination between multiple aircraft and extremely accurate weapons delivery under difficult conditions. "Captain Chun," Morrison said, turning toward her with obvious intent, "your experience with similar operations makes you the logical choice to lead this mission. Captain Richardson will serve as your deputy and coordinate the ground attack phase." Richardson felt a momentary surge of professional disappointment at being assigned to a supporting role, but his reaction was quickly replaced by curiosity about Morrison's reference to Chen's experience with similar operations. Her personnel file hadn't mentioned hostage rescue missions, but Morrison's confidence in her abilities suggested knowledge that went beyond standard squadron records. "Sir, I'll need detailed intelligence on the compound layout and enemy defensive positions," Chun said, stepping forward to study the tactical display more closely. "Do we have current reconnaissance data or satellite imagery that shows recent activity?" Morrison nodded and gestured toward the intelligence officer, Major Lisa Prophet Rodriguez, who approached the display with a thick folder of classified materials. "We received updated satellite images 2 hours ago," Rodriguez explained, spreading several large photographs across the briefing table. Richardson joined Chun and the other pilots in examining the reconnaissance photographs. The images showed a rectangular compound surrounded by high walls, with several buildings arranged around a central courtyard. Vehicle tracks in the surrounding area suggested recent activity, but the photographs didn't provide detailed information about defensive positions or hostage locations. "The compound covers approximately 4 acres, Rodriguez continued. "Intelligence suggests that the hostages are being held in the main building, which is located in the center of the courtyard. However, We can't confirm their exact location or the number of guards without additional reconnaissance. Chen studied the photographs with intense concentration, occasionally using a magnifying glass to examine specific details. Her analysis was systematic and thorough, suggesting familiarity with intelligence interpretation that went beyond basic pilot training. She asked several technical questions about image resolution and timing that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of reconnaissance capabilities. Based on this intelligence, I recommend a two-phase approach, Chen announced after completing her analysis. The first phase will involve suppressing the defensive positions around the perimeter, while the second phase will focus on creating conditions for ground forces to extract the hostages. Richardson found himself impressed by Chen's tactical assessment. Her approach balanced the need for decisive action with careful attention to minimizing risks to the hostages, demonstrating the kind of strategic thinking that marked exceptional military leaders. Captain Richardson, I'll need you to coordinate with the ground forces while I develop the air attack plan, Chen continued. The timing between our strikes and the ground assault will be critical to mission success. The assignment placed Richardson in a position of significant responsibility while allowing Chen to focus on the complex air-to-air coordination required for the mission. He appreciated her confidence in his abilities and recognized that her tactical plan would maximize the strengths of both officers. Captain Stevens and Lieutenant Martinez will provide close air support during the ground phase, Chen added. Captain Williams will maintain overwatch position to counter any unexpected threats or provide emergency extraction support if needed. The crew assignments reflected Chen's careful analysis of individual pilot strengths and the specific requirements of each mission phase. Richardson noticed that she was positioning the most experienced pilots in the most challenging roles while ensuring that Martinez would have experienced supervision throughout the operation. Time to target is 90 minutes, Morrison announced. Mexican authorities have confirmed that their ground forces will be in position to coordinate with our airstrikes. This is a joint operation with significant political implications, so precision and professionalism are essential. The political dimension of the mission added complexity beyond the tactical challenges. Richardson understood that successful completion would strengthen international cooperation against drug cartels, while failure could damage relationships with Mexican authorities and potentially result in hostile propaganda. Captain Chen, you have overall tactical command, Morrison concluded. Captain Richardson, coordinate with Major Rodriguez for ground force liaison. All other crew members, complete your pre-flight preparations and be ready for launch in 60 minutes. As the pilots dispersed to begin their mission preparations, Richardson found himself working closely with Rodriguez to understand the ground force capabilities and coordination requirements. The Mexican Special Forces unit assigned to the mission was highly trained and experienced, but communication protocols and tactical procedures required careful coordination to prevent friendly fire incidents. The ground commander is Colonel Miguel Santos, Rodriguez explained, showing Richardson a photograph and brief biography. He speaks excellent English and has worked with American forces on several previous operations. His unit specializes in hostage rescue and has an outstanding success record. Richardson studied Santos' background while mentally rehearsing the coordination procedures that would be required during the mission. The timing between air strikes and ground assault would need to be precise, with minimal communication to avoid alerting the hostages' captors to the impending rescue attempt. 30 minutes later, Richardson was strapped into his cockpit running through pre-flight checks, while ground crews loaded precision-guided munitions under his aircraft's wings. The weapons were specifically chosen to minimize collateral damage, while providing sufficient destructive power to neutralize defensive positions around the compound. Blue flight, red lead. Radio check. Chen's voice came through Richardson's headset as the aircraft prepared for takeoff. Blue lead, good copy, Richardson responded, followed by similar confirmations from the other pilots. The radio discipline was noticeably sharper than during training exercises, reflecting the increased stress and importance of real-world operations. Every pilot understood that communication mistakes could have lethal consequences for both aircrew and hostages. Tower, red lead requesting clearance for tactical departure. Chen transmitted to the control tower. Red lead, tower. You are cleared for immediate departure. Winds calm, visibility unlimited. Good hunting. The informal blessing from the tower controller reflected the entire base personnel's investment in mission success. Richardson felt the familiar surge of adrenaline as his aircraft accelerated down the runway, but his mind remained focused on the tactical challenges ahead. As the 5 aircraft formed up at cruising altitude, Richardson could see the mountainous terrain of northern Mexico stretching toward the southern horizon. The landscape appeared deceptively peaceful from altitude, but intelligence reports indicated that the area was controlled by one of Mexico's most violent drug cartels, making it extremely dangerous for unauthorized aircraft. Red flight, blue lead. Ground forces report ready in position. We have approximately 40 minutes to target, Richardson transmitted after receiving an update from Rodriguez through the command frequency. Copy, blue lead. Beginning descent for initial reconnaissance pass, Chen responded. The tactical plan called for Chen to conduct a high-altitude surveillance pass to confirm intelligence reports and identify any changes in defensive positions since the satellite photographs have been taken. The information gathered during this phase would determine final target assignments and attack sequences. Richardson monitored his instruments as the flight descended toward the target area, maintaining formation while watching for any signs of hostile activity. The mountains below were rugged and inhospitable, providing numerous hiding places for defensive weapons, but also creating navigation challenges for attacking aircraft. Red lead has visual contact with the target compound, Chen announced as they approached the valley where the hostages were being held. Richardson could see the rectangular structure highlighted in their intelligence photographs, but from altitude it appeared much smaller and more vulnerable than the satellite images had suggested. However, he knew that appearances could be deceiving, particularly when dealing with experienced criminal organizations that understood military tactics. Blue lead, red lead. I count at least 6 defensive positions around the perimeter, with possible anti-aircraft weapons in 2 locations on the eastern ridge, Chen reported after completing her reconnaissance pass. The intelligence update confirmed that the cartel had prepared for potential rescue attempts by positioning weapons to counter airborne threats. Richardson began calculating approach vectors and attack sequences that would minimize exposure to defensive fire while achieving maximum suppression of enemy weapons. Red flight, blue lead. Ground commander reports hostages confirmed in main building, center courtyard. Request immediate suppression of eastern ridge positions to clear approach route for ground assault, Richardson transmitted after receiving updated intelligence from Santos unit. Copy, blue lead. Red 2 and Red 3, follow me in for initial attack run. Blue lead, coordinate ground assault timing for 60 seconds after our first pass, Chen commanded. Richardson acknowledged while preparing to coordinate with Santos for the ground phase of the operation. The timing would be critical. Too early, and the ground forces would face intact defensive positions. Too late, and the cartel might realize what was happening and harm the hostages before extraction could be completed. Red lead is rolling and hot on Eastern Ridge, Chen announced as she began her attack run. Richardson watched through his targeting system as Chen's aircraft dove toward the first defensive position, approaching at high speed and low altitude to minimize exposure time. Her weapons release was perfectly timed, and secondary explosions indicated that she had successfully destroyed at least one heavy weapon position. Good hit, red lead. Continuing attack on remaining positions, Stevens reported as he followed Chen's lead with his own strike against the southern perimeter. The coordinated attack proceeded exactly as planned, with each pilot engaging assigned targets while maintaining awareness of friendly aircraft positions and ground force locations. Richardson felt a surge of professional admiration as he watched Chen coordinate the complex operation while simultaneously flying her own demanding attack profile. Blue lead, red lead. Defensive positions suppressed. Ground forces are cleared for assault, Chen transmitted after the last attack run was completed. Copy, red lead. Ground commander reports beginning assault now. Richardson responded while monitoring radio traffic from Santos' unit. The next several minutes were filled with tense radio chatter as the Mexican Special Forces moved through the compound searching for the hostages. Richardson maintained overwatch position while Chun and her wingmen provided immediate response capability if the ground forces encountered unexpected resistance. Blue lead, ground lead. Hostages secured, all safe. Beginning extraction now. Request air cover during movement to landing zone. Santos' voice came through clearly despite the stress of the ongoing operation. Richardson felt profound relief at the successful hostage rescue, but his attention remained focused on providing security during the vulnerable extraction phase. The cartel might attempt to interfere with the withdrawal, making continued air support essential until the hostages reach safety. Ground lead, blue lead. We have you covered. Red flight will escort during extraction route. Richardson transmitted while maneuvering to provide optimal overwatch coverage. The extraction proceeded without incident, with the hostages and rescue team reaching the designated landing zone, where helicopters were waiting to transport them to safety. Richardson maintained vigilant watch throughout the process, but no hostile activity was detected in the area. Mission complete. All hostages safe and en route to base, Santos reported as the helicopters departed the area. Richardson felt the familiar combination of relief and satisfaction that marks successful completion of dangerous missions. However, his strongest emotion was professional respect for Chen's exceptional leadership throughout the operation. Her tactical planning and execution had been flawless, demonstrating capabilities that exceeded anything he had previously encountered. As Red Flight formed up for the return to base, Richardson found himself reviewing the mission sequence and analyzing Chen's performance. Her decisions had been consistently optimal, and her coordination of 5 aircraft during a complex operation had been handled with apparent ease. Most importantly, her planning had achieved mission success without casualties among either aircrew or hostages. Outstanding mission leadership. Richardson transmitted to Chun as they climbed to cruising altitude for the flight home. Thank you, Blue Lead. Excellent work by everyone involved. Chun responded graciously. The professional courtesy couldn't hide Richardson's genuine amazement at Chen's capabilities under actual combat conditions. Her performance during training exercises had been impressive, but her leadership during a real-world hostage rescue had demonstrated skills that went far beyond normal squadron expectations. As the desert landscape of Arizona appeared on the horizon, Richardson realized that his initial skepticism about Chen's call sign had been completely transformed into deep professional respect. Iron Angel was beginning to seem like an understatement rather than an exaggeration, and he suspected that today's mission was just the beginning of recognizing Chen's true capabilities. 2 weeks after the successful hostage rescue, Richardson sat in the squadron-ready room reading intelligence briefings when Major Rodriguez approached with a classified folder marked with security classifications he hadn't seen in years. Her expression was unusually serious, carrying the weight of information that would change everything the squadron thought they understood about their newest member. Captain Richardson, Colonel Morrison wants to see you and Captain Chin in his office immediately, Rodriguez said quietly, glancing around to ensure their conversation wasn't being overheard by other squadron personnel. Richardson closed his briefing materials and followed Rodriguez down the hallway toward Morrison's office, his mind racing through possible explanations for such an urgent meeting. The security markings on Rodriguez's folder suggested intelligence that went far beyond normal squadron operations, and the timing indicated a connection to recent events that hadn't been fully explained. Morrison's office was larger than typical squadron commander spaces, reflecting his additional responsibilities for base security and regional operations. Today, however, it felt cramped with the addition of 2 men in civilian suits who were clearly not military personnel despite their obvious comfort in military environments. Chin was already seated when Richardson arrived, her expression calm, but alert as she observed the visitors. Her posture suggested familiarity with high-level briefings, reinforcing Richardson's growing suspicion that her background involved classified assignments that hadn't been disclosed to the squadron. "Captain Richardson, please have a seat," Morrison said, gesturing toward an empty chair while maintaining the formal tone that indicated serious business. "Gentlemen, this is Captain Marcus Richardson, my deputy squadron commander." The older of the two civilians stood and extended his hand. "David Mitchell, Central Intelligence Agency," he said simply, his grip firm and his eyes assessing Richardson with the practiced evaluation of someone accustomed to reading people quickly and accurately. Richardson felt his eyebrows rise involuntarily at the CIA identification. Intelligence agency involvement suggested that recent events had implications far beyond normal military operations, and he began to understand why Morrison had requested this meeting with such obvious urgency. Agent Thompson, National Security Agency, the second man said, also standing to shake hands. His manner was more reserved than Mitchell's, but his presence confirmed that multiple intelligence agencies had interest in whatever information was about to be shared. Morrison gestured for everyone to be seated while Rodriguez distributed copies of the classified briefing materials. Richardson noticed that Chen's folder was significantly thicker than his own, suggesting that she was already familiar with much of the information they were about to discuss. "Gentlemen, what I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room," Morrison began, his tone carrying the weight of national security implications. Captain Chen's assignment to this squadron was not routine personnel transfer. She's here as part of a classified operation that has significant implications for regional security. Richardson glanced toward Chun, who was listening with the same professional attention she had shown during tactical briefings. However, her lack of surprise suggested that she was already aware of the information Morrison was about to reveal, which raised additional questions about her actual role and responsibilities. 3 months ago, intelligence agencies identified a sophisticated network of international arms dealers who were using the Mexican border region to smuggle advanced weapons systems into the United States, Mitchell explained, opening his briefing folder to reveal satellite photographs and surveillance reports. The scope of the intelligence operation was beginning to register with Richardson. Arms smuggling represented a direct threat to national security, particularly if the weapons involved were sophisticated enough to attract CIA and NSA attention. Chen's involvement suggested that her previous assignments had provided relevant experience or capabilities. The weapons being smuggled include advanced surface-to-air missiles that could pose significant threats to civilian aircraft, Thompson added. "Our investigation has identified multiple delivery routes and storage locations, but the organization behind the smuggling operation has proven extremely difficult to penetrate." Richardson studied the satellite photographs while processing the implications of what he was learning. The hostage rescue mission had obviously been more than a humanitarian operation. It had provided an opportunity to gather intelligence about criminal organizations operating in the border region. Captain Chun has been working undercover for the past 2 years to infiltrate the intelligence networks supporting these smuggling operations, Morrison continued. Her cover as a Marine pilot has provided access to information that traditional intelligence methods couldn't obtain. The revelation about Chen's undercover status explained many of the mysteries surrounding her background and capabilities. Her exceptional flying skills were real, but they had been developed through classified training programs designed to support intelligence operations rather than conventional military assignments. The hostage rescue mission provided an opportunity to gather critical intelligence about the smuggling network's operational security and response capabilities, Mitchell explained. Captain Chen's tactical leadership during that mission was genuine, but she also collected information that has advanced our investigation significantly. Richardson found himself reviewing his interactions with Chun in light of this new information. Her professional competence had been completely authentic, but her true mission had involved objectives far beyond squadron integration and training exercises. He felt both admiration for her professionalism and concern about the complexities of her actual situation. "Captain Richardson, your performance during the hostage rescue demonstrated exceptional tactical abilities and discretion," Thompson said. We're requesting your assistance with the next phase of our operation, which will require close coordination between military and intelligence assets. The request for his involvement represented both professional recognition and personal challenge. Richardson understood that accepting would mean becoming part of classified operations that could affect his military career in unpredictable ways, while declining might limit his future opportunities for challenging assignments. Sir, what would my role be in this operation? Richardson asked, directing his question toward Morrison while maintaining awareness of the intelligence officer's reactions. The smuggling network is planning a major weapons transfer sometime within the next month, Mitchell explained. We need military aircraft to provide surveillance and potential interdiction capabilities without alerting the criminals to our intelligence penetration. Chun spoke for the first time since Richardson's arrival. The operation will require pilots who can maintain operational security while performing complex missions under difficult conditions, she said. Your performance during the hostage rescue demonstrated both technical skills and discretion that make you an ideal candidate for this assignment. Richardson appreciated Chen's professional assessment, but he was more interested in understanding the specific risks and responsibilities involved in the proposed operation. Intelligence missions operated under different rules than conventional military assignments, with potential consequences that extended far beyond normal career considerations. What are the operational parameters? Richardson asked. How long would this assignment last? And what would be my cover status? Morrison leaned forward, his expression indicating that this was the crucial decision point for Richardson's involvement. Officially, you would remain assigned to normal squadron duties, he said. Unofficially, you would participate in selected missions designed to gather intelligence and potentially interdict weapon shipments. The dual nature of the proposed assignment appealed to Richardson's sense of professional challenge while raising concerns about operational security and personal safety. Working with intelligence agencies involved risks that went beyond conventional military dangers, particularly when dealing with international criminal organizations. Captain Richardson, I want to emphasize that participation in this operation is completely voluntary, Thompson said. If you decline, there will be no negative impact on your military career. However, if you accept, you'll be contributing to an operation that could significantly enhance national security. Richardson glanced toward Chun, who was watching him with obvious interest but no apparent pressure to accept the assignment. Her expression suggested confidence in his decision-making abilities while acknowledging the complexity of the choice he was facing. I need some time to consider the implications, Richardson said after carefully weighing his response. Can I have 24 hours to make a decision? Morrison nodded approvingly. Of course. This is a significant commitment that shouldn't be made hastily, he said. Captain Chun, please provide Captain Richardson with additional background information that will help him make an informed decision. As the meeting concluded and the intelligence officers departed, Richardson found himself walking with Chun toward the squadron operations building. The afternoon sun was beginning to sink toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the desert landscape that seemed appropriate for the mysterious developments of recent weeks. How long have you known about my real assignment? Chun asked as they walked across the tarmac. Richardson smiled slightly at her direct approach. I suspected something unusual from the beginning, he said. Your flying skills and tactical awareness were too exceptional for normal squadron assignment. The hostage rescue convinced me that you had experience beyond typical Marine Corps training. Chun nodded, apparently unsurprised by his perceptiveness. Maintaining cover while performing effectively has been one of the most challenging aspects of this assignment, she said. I've had to balance demonstrating competence with avoiding too much attention to my background. The complexity of Chen's situation was beginning to register fully with Richardson. Undercover intelligence work required exceptional psychological strength, particularly when maintaining false identities for extended periods while performing genuinely demanding professional duties. What can you tell me about the weapons smuggling operation? Richardson asked. How dangerous are the people we'd be dealing with? Chen's expression became more serious as she considered her response. The organization is sophisticated and well-funded, with connections to international terrorist groups, she said. They've already demonstrated willingness to use violence against anyone who threatens their operations. The danger assessment confirmed Richardson's suspicion that accepting the assignment would involve risks beyond normal military operations. Criminal organizations operating at international levels typically had resources and capabilities that made them formidable adversaries, particularly when protecting valuable smuggling networks. However, the intelligence agencies have developed comprehensive operational security procedures that significantly reduce personal risk, Chun continued. The key is maintaining strict adherence to established protocols while performing our assigned missions. Richardson appreciated Chen's balanced assessment of both risks and safeguards. Her experience with intelligence operations provided valuable perspective on the realistic challenges involved, while her obvious professionalism suggested that the assignment could be managed successfully with proper preparation and attention to detail. What happens if the criminals discover that you're working undercover? Richardson asked, raising one of his primary concerns about long-term intelligence operations. Chun was quiet for several moments, her expression indicating careful consideration of how much information to share. That's always a risk in this type of work, she said finally. However, my cover has been carefully constructed and thoroughly tested. The chances of discovery are minimal if we maintain proper operational security. The confidence in Chen's response was reassuring, but Richardson understood that intelligence operations always involved uncertainties that couldn't be completely eliminated. The question was whether the potential benefits justified the inherent risks, both personally and professionally. If I decide to participate, what would be the first assignment? Richardson asked. Intelligence has identified a weapons storage facility approximately 100 miles south of the border, Chen explained. We need aerial reconnaissance to confirm the facility's layout and security arrangements before planning any interdiction operations. The reconnaissance mission sounded relatively straightforward, but Richardson understood that even routine intelligence gathering could become dangerous quickly if circumstances changed unexpectedly. The key would be thorough preparation and careful attention to potential contingencies. How much time do I have to prepare if I accept the assignment? Richardson asked. Chen smiled for the first time during their conversation. That depends on how quickly you can absorb classified briefing materials and complete specialized training requirements, she said. Intelligence agencies are efficient when they need to be, but they also insist on thorough preparation. Richardson appreciated the realistic assessment of training requirements. Intelligence operations require different skills and knowledge than conventional military assignments, and you would need time to develop competencies that weren't part of normal pilot training programs. As they reached the squadron building, Richardson realized that his decision would fundamentally change both his military career and his relationship with Chun. Accepting the assignment would make them partners in dangerous work that required exceptional trust and coordination, while declining would mean watching from the sidelines as she continued her classified mission alone. Sarah, he said, using her first name for the first time since they had met. Thank you for being honest about the risks and responsibilities. It helps me understand what I'd be committing to. Chen extended her hand with obvious sincerity. Marcus, whatever you decide, I respect your thoughtfulness in considering all the implications, she said. This type of work isn't for everyone, and there's no shame in choosing conventional military assignments over intelligence operations. Richardson shook her hand while studying her expression for additional insights into her true feelings about his potential involvement. Her professionalism remained constant, but he detected subtle signs of hope that suggested she valued the possibility of working together on the challenging mission ahead. That evening, Richardson sat in his quarters reviewing classified materials that Chun had provided about the weapons smuggling investigation. The scope and sophistication of the criminal organization was impressive, but the potential impact of successful interdiction operations was significant enough to justify the risks involved. The decision would require him to trust Chun completely while accepting dangers that went beyond anything he had experienced in conventional military service. However, The opportunity to contribute to national security in such a direct and meaningful way represented the kind of professional challenge he had been seeking throughout his military career. As the desert night settled over the air base, Richardson found himself increasingly confident that accepting the assignment was the right decision, both professionally and personally. Tomorrow, he would inform Morrison of his choice and begin preparing for intelligence operations that would test his skills and judgment in ways he had never imagined possible. 6 months later, Richardson found himself crouched behind a rocky outcropping in the mountains of northern Mexico, watching through night vision equipment as heavily armed smugglers loaded advanced surface-to-air missiles into modified cargo trucks. The intelligence operation that had begun with skepticism about Chen's call sign had evolved into the most dangerous and important mission of his military career. The path to this moment had been filled with intensive training, classified briefings, and reconnaissance missions that gradually revealed the full scope of the international weapons smuggling network. Chen had been his constant partner throughout the preparation phase, sharing expertise gained through 2 years of undercover work while helping him develop the specialized skills required for intelligence operations. Their partnership had evolved from professional respect into something approaching complete trust, forged through shared dangers and mutual reliance during increasingly complex missions. Richardson had learned to appreciate not just Chen's exceptional flying abilities, but her analytical intelligence and operational creativity that consistently turned tactical disadvantages into strategic opportunities. Tonight's mission represented the culmination of months of careful planning and intelligence gathering. The weapons storage facility they were observing contained enough advanced missiles to pose serious threats to civilian aircraft throughout the southwestern United States, making successful interdiction essential for national security. Blue lead, red lead. I count 12 vehicles and approximately 30 personnel, Chen whispered through the encrypted radio system as she observed the smuggling operation from a position 500 yards to Richardson's east. Richardson adjusted his night vision equipment to study the scene more carefully. The criminal organization had demonstrated impressive operational security throughout the intelligence investigation, but tonight they were exposed and vulnerable as they attempted to move their most valuable inventory to a new location. Red lead, blue lead. Confirmed 12 vehicles. I also see what appears to be additional weapons containers that haven't been loaded yet, Richardson responded quietly. The discovery of additional weapons represented both opportunity and challenge for the interdiction operation. More missiles meant greater potential impact from successful mission completion, but it also indicated that the criminal organization was larger and better equipped than intelligence estimates had suggested. Blue lead, red lead. Mexican Special Forces report ready in position Alpha. American ground team confirms ready in position Bravo. Chen transmitted after receiving updates from the Coordinated Ground Assault Forces. The complexity of tonight's operation required precise coordination between multiple military units from 2 countries, along with intelligence personnel and air support assets. Richardson felt the familiar pre-mission tension that always preceded dangerous operations, but his confidence in the planning and preparation was higher than he had ever experienced. Red lead, blue lead. Air support reports on station at designated altitude. Extraction helicopters standing by at secure location. Richardson confirmed after monitoring radio traffic from the various supporting units. The layered approach to tonight's mission reflected lessons learned during months of intelligence operations and tactical planning. Every contingency had been considered and prepared for, with backup plans and alternative extraction routes available if primary objectives encountered unexpected resistance. Blue lead, red lead. Target vehicles beginning to move. Recommend initiating operation now. Chen observed as the smugglers completed loading operations and prepared to depart the storage facility. Richardson felt his pulse increase as the moment for decisive action arrived. The months of preparation and reconnaissance had led to this critical window of opportunity when the entire weapons shipment would be exposed and vulnerable to coordinated interdiction efforts. Red lead, blue lead. Ground commanders report ready for immediate action. All units standing by for your signal. Richardson transmitted while making final preparations for his role in the operation. Chen's voice came through the radio with calm authority that had become familiar during their months of partnership. All units, red lead. Execute. 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 The coordinated assault began with flashbang grenades and smoke charges that created chaos and confusion among the smugglers while protecting the attacking forces from immediate counterfire. Richardson watched through his night vision equipment as Mexican and American Special Forces moved with practiced precision through the compound, systematically securing objectives and neutralizing resistance. Blue lead, red lead. Mexican forces have secured the eastern perimeter. American team is moving on the weapons storage building. Chen reported as the ground phase of the operation proceeded according to plan. Richardson monitored radio traffic from the assault forces while maintaining overwatch on escape routes that smugglers might use to avoid capture. His position provided excellent observation of the entire valley, allowing him to coordinate with air support if unexpected threats emerged during the operation. Red lead, blue lead. I have movement on the southern ridge. Possible reinforcements approaching from the main road. Richardson warned as his thermal imaging equipment detected vehicle heat signatures moving toward the compound. The appearance of additional hostile forces represented the kind of contingency that comprehensive planning was designed to address. Chen's response was immediate and decisive, demonstrating the tactical leadership that had earned her the call sign Iron Angel. Blue lead, red lead. Request air support engage approaching vehicles while maintaining safe distance from ground operations. Chen commanded while adjusting her own position to better coordinate the expanding tactical situation. Richardson heard the distinctive sound of military aircraft as F/A-18 Super Hornets arrived on station and began engaging the smuggler reinforcements with precision-guided munitions. The effectiveness of the airstrikes was immediately apparent as secondary explosions indicated that some of the approaching vehicles had been carrying additional weapons or explosives. All units, red lead. Hostile reinforcements neutralized. Ground operations continuing according to plan. Chen reported as the tactical situation stabilized. The successful coordination between air and ground forces reflected months of training and preparation, but Richardson was particularly impressed by Chen's ability to maintain situational awareness and effective command control during rapidly changing circumstances. Her tactical leadership was exceptional even by the standards of elite military operations. Blue lead, red lead. Mexican commander reports weapons secured and facility under complete control. Beginning evidence collection and prisoner processing. Chen transmitted as the primary objectives of the mission were achieved. Richardson felt profound relief at the successful completion of the interdiction operation, but his attention remained focused on security during the vulnerable extraction phase. Criminal organizations often plan counterattacks during withdrawal operations, making continued vigilance essential until all personnel were safely out of the operational area. Red lead, blue lead. Air support reports no additional hostile activity detected in surrounding area. Extraction helicopters cleared for approach to designated landing zones. Richardson confirmed as the final phase of the operation began. The extraction proceeded without incident, with Mexican and American personnel successfully removing captured weapons, collected intelligence materials, and detained smugglers. Richardson maintained overwatch until the last helicopter departed the area, then began his own withdrawal toward the predetermined extraction point. 2 hours later, Richardson and Chen were debriefing with intelligence officers and military commanders at a secure facility near the Arizona border. The scope of their success was becoming clear as analysts processed the captured weapons and intelligence materials that had been recovered during the operation. Initial analysis indicates that we've disrupted the largest international weapons smuggling network ever discovered in this region, announced Assistant Director Mitchell as he reviewed preliminary reports from various intelligence agencies. The significance of their achievement was gratifying, but Richardson was more interested in understanding the long-term implications for both the criminal organization and future security operations in the border region. Successful interdiction often prompted smuggling networks to develop new methods and routes, requiring continued vigilance and adaptive tactical approaches. Captain Chun, your undercover work provided the intelligence foundation that made tonight's success possible, said Colonel Morrison, who had traveled to the debriefing facility to personally commend the operation's key participants. Chun accepted the recognition graciously, but Richardson noticed that her attention was already focused on the intelligence materials being processed by analyst teams. Her dedication to the mission extended beyond personal achievement to genuine concern about ongoing threats to national security. Captain Richardson, your tactical coordination and operational security throughout this investigation has been exemplary, Morrison continued. Both of you have demonstrated the kind of professional excellence that represents the finest traditions of Marine Corps aviation. The formal recognition was professionally satisfying, but Richardson's strongest emotion was admiration for Chin's exceptional performance throughout months of dangerous and complex operations. Her courage, intelligence, and tactical leadership had consistently exceeded the highest standards of military service. Sir, what are the next steps for continuing this investigation? Chin asked, directing her question toward Mitchell while maintaining her characteristic focus on operational objectives rather than personal recognition. Mitchell smiled approvingly at Chin's forward-looking perspective. We have several leads that require follow-up investigation, he said. However, both of you have earned extended leave time before undertaking any additional classified assignments. The prospect of leave time was appealing, but Richardson found himself hoping that future operations would continue to involve partnership with Chun. Their professional relationship had evolved into exceptional tactical coordination that would be difficult to replicate with other personnel. Captain Chun, I'd like to discuss long-term assignment options with you, Morrison said. Your unique combination of aviation and intelligence skills makes you extremely valuable for future operations that we're already beginning to plan. Richardson felt a moment of concern that Chun might be reassigned to duties that would separate their partnership, but her response indicated that she was also interested in continuing their collaborative work. Sir, I prefer to remain with this squadron if possible, Chun said. Captain Richardson and I have developed excellent working relationships that would be beneficial for future operations. Morrison nodded thoughtfully. That can definitely